everybody. Welcome to Screen Less, Play More podcast. I am Cynthia, the founder of ScreenLessPlayMore.com, and I have very good news for parents because the most beneficial thing you can do for your children, as it turns out, is absolutely free. You don't need to shuttle them around in the car. You don't need to pay for expensive uniforms or be at a certain place at a certain time. And this, of course, is free play. And this is what I'm going to be discussing today with my guest, Rachel Ramsden. She is a research coordinator and PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Her research aims to understand how best to support children's outdoor and risky play in early childhood. And since becoming a mom last year, Rachel has been rediscovering children's play through both a scientific and parental lens. So welcome, Rachel.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So what really is a example or a few examples of the most beneficial kind of play for our kids?
That's a great question. I think a lot of parents are always looking for what's that one single formula? What's the best form of play that my child can do? In particular, if they only have a certain amount of time in the day or 20 minutes to get their children moving and playing. I, of course, in my area of research, I'm going to say outdoors, get them outside.
Okay.
And that's the best form of play because we know that the outdoors offers so many unique benefits for children that can't be achieved indoors. Indoor play has its own unique benefits as well, but when children are outside, they're able to move their bodies in large gross motor movements. They can yell, they can scream, they can exert energy. And I always bring it back to the saying where I remember growing up in childhood and always being told, use your inside voice or no running in the hallways. And the outdoors provided that opportunity to do all those things, right? To run really fast, to yell. We could use our outside voice. And that really provides these unique benefits for children to express their emotions and move their body, things that just can't be achieved always through play indoors.
Because you take away a lot of those constraints. Like you said, you're not saying, quiet down, don't kick that, and don't break the lamp. Don't, inside there's just so many constraints that you put on kids of you can't do that because you're going to break the such and such, or you're going to hit your head on the wall. And so just the tiny change of going outside already makes it a little more free for them, no matter what they're doing, right?
100%. And that's that aspect of free play as well. The self-directed, unstructured. I think too, for parents, being outdoors gives that freedom and there's less judgment as well. So indoors, especially if you think about being inside someone else's home or in a structured setting like a school or a classroom, there's these expectations that children are going to sit and listen and use those inside voices. But when children are outdoors, there's almost this judgment kind of disappears where we know that children are going to take more of those louder activities on or challenges or risk-taking. And there's more of an acceptance when it's outdoors. And so I think children also feed off that and they know that they can do those things outside with less restrictions.
What's the benefit then of just the simple things like feeling the wind on your face or hearing the birds or getting into the dirt? What does the outdoors give kids that the indoors really can't?
So I think some of the examples I just gave really talked more about the physical, energy expenditure. But you're so right that there's so many little things about being outdoors that provide these benefits, such as just the sensory components. So being able to touch the ground and feel dirt is actually something that not children get to do day to day.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that maybe we did in childhood, right, all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but nowadays it's really disappeared. And that's for many different reasons. But there are so many benefits for children to have access to natural materials, to feel the wind, to, you know, be able to breathe in an environment where they're not surrounded by walls. And that again gets at these unique benefits to being outdoors. And some of the research has shown that there's these profound impacts on children's health, development, and well being, in particular when we're thinking about mental health
Mm.
and anxiety and this feeling of always being overstructured and over supervised. That's a feeling that children get a lot. And so when they're outside and interacting with nature, it has this grounding effect where children can kind of relax, take a step
Mm-hmm.
back, breathe, and let their brain slow down. There's not a lot of rest that children get now in their life. And we're not talking about rest where, they're on a screen and they're sitting
Mm-hmm.
on a couch inside. This is more of their mind is clear and they actually have to sit with themselves and
Yeah.
work through boredom.
Yeah.
And that's something that children get when they're outside with nothing going on right around them.
That's huge because when they're sitting on a screen, they are not resting their brains at all. They're actually getting flooded with dopamine and it's jazzing them up. So I think a lot of parents think, oh, they just got home from school. I'm going to let them chill and play a game. And it's actually kind of doing the opposite. It's really jazzing them up. Whereas if they got to go in the backyard, it really actually would calm them down. And like you're saying, I mean, they might get bored, but what is your advice if we're like, okay, time to go in the backyard, and they're like, there's nothing to do in the backyard? How would you suggest that people kind of give them a little spark to help them figure out what to do without actually directing them?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think I know myself as a new parent, I face this all the time where I envision my child just being outside all the time and wanting to be out there. And we know that's not the reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
The indoors has a lot of things that entice children, such as screens. And
Mm-hmm.
I always think about it as screens offer these instant gratification, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
this instant component of excitement or stimuli, whereas the outdoors actually really requires children to work through steps, and that could be something like encountering boredom
Mm-hmm.
in order to receive the thrill. So there's a component of navigating through boredom or figuring out what to do in order to receive that gratification. So it's not instant. And I think it's a really important piece that children need to work through this. It really is a life skill to be able to
Mm-hmm.
work through their boredom and figure out how to tackle that and move over that hill and find something that they like.
Mm-hmm.
It will carry through in life because as adults, we encounter this all the time too, what to do in our leisure time. And it's very easy to just pick up a screen to fill that void versus actually work through what lights our passion or brings us joy beyond a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what I would say in terms of for parents that are facing this and they want children still to work through that when they're in their backyard or they're at the park and they're facing this dilemma where children are really not enjoying it. I do think there's an opportunity here to support children to work through that and talk with them about what that's feeling like to them. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, trying to evoke some curiosity, but maybe not setting out the roadmap for
Mm-hmm.
them,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
because if I ever hear I'm bored from my sons or my nieces or something, I just say like, it's okay to be bored. You'll figure it out. And I say, it's a muscle. You're gonna have to like really use this muscle to figure out what you want to do. And I read Balanced and Barefoot by Angela Hanscom, which is so, so good. And she says that it takes about 45 minutes for kids to really figure out what they want to play. Like if it's a group of kids of like, okay, you're going to be this person, you're going to be this person. We're doing a store, we're doing a, whatever. And that like, you really got to give them some time to work through the boredom, work through who's going to do what and what are we going to do. And then boom, right around 45 minutes, they get into it and then they're ready to go and it's awesome. So another thing is trying not to just cut kids off with like, okay, we're going outside for 10 minutes. That's not enough time for them to really get into a play scheme. That's one thing I was going to ask you is what are we doing as parents that's kind of getting in the way of letting them do free play?
Well, I think there's a lot as modern parents that we're facing that really conflicts with this idea of outdoor free play. And it's not necessarily our fault. It's more of the society that we're in today as modern parents. And that, of course, is the dilemma with screen times and competing interests in terms of structured sports and, academic expectations where we just feel like there isn't enough time in the day to get to everything. And so free play becomes that thing that gets pushed down the list because it's a lot harder to feel like it is as important as maybe some other things. And so I think one of the areas here that's really important to consider is that as parents, we're facing so many different expectations and the influence of social media and parenting groups has really made it so that we almost feel like we're not doing anything right. I mean, I feel that way a lot, right? It's I I feel like while I was on parental leave, I would take my daughter out for a walk all the time in my neighborhood and I'd sometimes get, a passerby. They meant it in good intentions, with like, "Oh, you haven't put socks on your baby's feet." And I was like, "Do I not just get a high five for making it out of my house today?" Right?
Yeah.
So it's so interesting how we're always facing, I feel like, judgment, whether it's as a parent or a supervisor or a responsible adult. So I think the first thing I would say in terms of what are we doing wrong, I wouldn't say we're doing anything wrong. I just think the way society is set up now, it makes it feel hard for us to do the right thing, one of which is getting kids outdoors. And the judgment that we feel with, for example, letting our children walk to school on their own. There's a lot of fear of judgment. There's also this idea that if a child gets injured, like a bump or a scrape or a bruise, that we're going to be judged as parents. And that impacts the ability for children to be outdoors as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point that, like, I don't want to be judging people. I know it's so hard. And like you said, you're just pulled in a million different directions. I guess it's just like we're getting in the way sometimes, I think, because we think we're doing the right thing. Like we think, oh, I should have them enrolled in sports. I should have them enrolled in all these activities. Because like you said, society is just telling us that on a constant basis. And everybody you meet, if you meet a new parent, oh, what kind of stuff does your kid do? Like you're always being asked, well, oh, what do you have them enrolled in? And I do get kind of weird looks when it's like, oh yeah, we don't really do that much. Like we have one or two things that we do, but I try to keep the afternoons open so they can just come home and play. A lot of that is because I've done so much research on this and I have talked to so many people and I realize how important it is. But I think if people don't know that just playing is extremely beneficial, and don't worry, you're not being lazy. Like this is really so good for them. And if they're just playing around in the backyard, you're not doing something wrong. You're not being lazy. You're really doing something great for them. And it's so much easier for you than running them around town to this and that and the other thing. And those other things aren't bad, but I just think some parents are so overwhelmed with every single day there's a different activity. And I just want people to know, if you pare it back and take a breath, you're not doing something wrong. You're actually really helping your kids out by giving them some downtime, giving them some playtime.
And I think it's so hard because especially in our area of research, we know there are definitely ingredients and tools for parents on how to support outdoor play. And it's exactly kind of the ideas that you're saying. So we don't need to overstructure children into sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also don't need to schedule outdoor free play time because that's kind of the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. We're really trying to just support children to make the decision to go outdoors on their own and have that become a lifelong skill to know how to play in free time and choose that as their preferred activity. And I think the point you mentioned is really critical because it's not that we're doing something wrong as parents. It's just that we've been told to do so many things that we
Mm-hmm.
just feel like we have to overstructure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the academic pressures as well come into this where, after children are done school, it almost feels like they need to just, and this is more for school age children, we need to then put them into structured activities kind of until dinner time. And then there's the wind down before bed or homework or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of go, when are they playing
Mm-hmm.
on their
Mm-hmm.
own accord? There just isn't really that time in the day for them to do that. And that's really just a product of how our society is now, especially with, working families, working later days,
Mm-hmm.
and there it's just the product, I think, of where we are right now.
Yeah. Um, Now what is actual free play and how would it be different, say, than going outside and playing a game of tag or playing a game of soccer? What is the difference?
So, free play really supports activities and play behaviors that are open ended and have no fixed design or outcome.
Okay.
So, there's definitely a component of creativity and imagination, but it doesn't mean that's the only part to free play. There could be more sedentary activities, right? It could be something that's more restorative for children where they're, as we talked about earlier, just sitting, observing, taking in nature, running their hands through the soil, but there is no imposed outcome on their play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another important piece to this is that it is very child directed. So the child is determining that they want to play and also how long they want to play, maybe when they want to stop and take a break. And this is so different than structured sports or any kind of structured activity, because those are set times. So that's saying,
Mm-hmm.
from 5 to 5:45, you have soccer practice, and an adult is directing all the activities during that time, and they're attending for that portion.
Mm-hmm.
If a child wants to continue playing after that time, it's like, too bad, the next group's on, we're
Mm-hmm.
back in the car. It's very, very adult directed, and there's definitely a place for those activities in a child's world because it teaches, how to follow directions, how to work in large group settings, how to navigate peer interactions and, adult direction. But free play has so many other benefits where there is this idea that children can enhance their skills in planning and focusing, imagination, autonomy, self-confidence, because it's all directed from themselves.
Okay.
So they are really the pilot on their own
Okay.
journey, self-selecting what they're choosing to do.
So they could be deciding, I'm going to build a sandcastle, or I'm just, like you said, I'm just going to feel the sand. I'm not even going to make anything, or I'm going to go climb that tree, or I'm going to make a little fort out of these sticks, or it's just like whatever's around, whatever they feel like doing, or I'm going to pretend like this is a store with my friend and it's just like whatever they come up with. But the parents or the soccer coach or the daycare person in charge, in theory, with free play, they wouldn't be telling them, okay, everybody, now we're going to build a fort. Free play, like, if I get this right, it's just like, here's all these materials in the yard or in the playground. Go for it. Do whatever you want. Is that the
Yeah,
thought?
exactly. And I will say that there's a lot of different perspectives on free or unstructured play, because it's almost like there's a continuum, and what is the adult involvement in that? And where I kind of lie in this free play is that I do think that adults can still play a role in free play, but they become more of an active participant on their play journey versus imposing any, restrictions or direction. But adults can still participate, because I think the connection between adults and children is so important. But you become more of a child with them in the play
Mm-hmm.
activity versus restricting or trying to direct or, you know, tell them what to do next. And I think that also comes with setting up the environment. So as you mentioned, you can definitely have things in the environment that you're supporting, whether that's loose parts or maybe in the backyard, you're like, oh, we've got some really great new sticks or logs that I'm going to put out. But I think what I see often is parents will go, well, I got this, great new toy, like a slide. And so I'll put it out, and then the child's there, and then they kind of leave them and say, all right, that's free play. But I think free play is really a step beyond that, where it there isn't like one thing set up in the environment,
Okay.
because then that's really directing children to go do that. So it's this idea that there's a blank canvas and children have to really choose what they want to do. And that addresses that piece that we talked about earlier with boredom and being
Mm-hmm.
able to choose an activity instead of just having one thing presented in front of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I've found couple years ago, I started doing something that I called Screen Free Sunday. And I don't let my two sons watch screens on Sundays. And it's pretty interesting how that they're very used to it now. And so they know that they're not even supposed to ask to watch TV or play a game or anything. And so it's interesting to kind of watch through how they deal with that. Like yesterday afternoon, we were out in the backyard and one of my sons kept saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And he wasn't necessarily like whining about it or asking me to solve it for him because he knew I wasn't going to. Because usually I just say like, oh, you'll figure it out. But it's interesting, my advice to parents is when you take the screens out of the equation, it does give you that time to do other things. So he had to really think about it. And he finally went upstairs in his room and he opened a drawer under his bed and he found this robot that he had gotten for Christmas a couple years ago. And he decided, oh, I'm going to program my robot and put it together. But he really had to sit around for a few minutes and think, what do I want to do? And I feel like that's the day when like we're forced to think like, what are those board games that we've had sitting around? What are those toys that we haven't played with in months or something? Because just you take the screens out of the equation as an option to fall back on. But in terms of the backyard, like you were saying, if you want to leave out loose parts or something, in your perfect world, what would a backyard look like that was kind of the ideal place for free play to take place?
I think for me, some of the key ingredients, and they're not anything that require a lot of time or resources, but natural elements. So that is,
Okay.
planting uh, some kind of soil that can be used to dig or manipulate. A tree would be amazing, like
Okay.
a tree to climb, but I know in my backyard, I don't have that at all. It's just the nature of the neighborhood we're in. So we have to go to the park to get that. But, if you have a tree, not everyone has a tree in their backyard. And that is pretty wild to think about that, trees are hard to find sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But any kind of natural elements, because there is so much that you can use and manipulate in the environment. But one of the big things that we see in our research is that it also creates this connection to the land for children. And that's so important. So being able to understand how to take care of the environment, creating this, reciprocal loop of caring and planting and then maybe growing food. Those are all skills that as parents we talk about teaching our children maybe as they get into their later years in the school system. But if you can start that with your children from a young age, then we're actually teaching them more than just play, right? And play isn't necessarily something we're teaching. It's more so thinking beyond of how to be a good citizen and contribute to your community and, understanding that when you go to the park, that if there's trash, you pick it up. That's just something you can start thinking about when you have access to nature in your backyard. And with natural elements comes a lot of loose parts. And you're going to hear me talk about that probably quite a bit today, but loose parts are just so easy to integrate, whether you're in your play or your backyard, in the playground, at your school, and they're so low cost. You can find them anywhere. They can be natural elements. They could be a spatula from your kitchen. But the most important thing about these things is they serve so many different purposes. So they're not fixed outcomes. Children can do so many different things. So they change every day and every time children play with them.
Okay. So trying not to have a toy that does only one thing, like a guitar that lights up and has batteries and plays for you, but more, like you're saying, spatulas, pots, pans, pine cones. Like, what are some other examples of things we could have available?
Planks,
Oh,
like
okay.
wood planks,
Okay.
construction items, even, like buckets and sand toys are great as well. I I think every toy has a purpose at times, so I'm definitely not gonna, sit here and say that my daughter doesn't have a light up toy or two, because we know that naturally those things just happen. But I think most parents probably listening to this right now can think about their children and what they gravitate towards. And the light up toys that you described, often there's a novelty effect, right? So children get really into it, maybe for like 5 to 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden they're on to the next one and then the next one. And it almost serves, again, this instant gratification piece that we've talked about. But loose parts can change all the time. And it's something that children can always come back to time and time again over the life course. So it's not just this window of 12 to 24 months, here's a toy. 24 to or 2 to 4 years, here's a toy. Loose parts just evolve and change as children age and their developmental level changes, and they become a different thing, like a wand or, an imaginative play item. And so I think too, when we're thinking about what is the best resources to go out and select if you're wanting to add something to your space, like a backyard, definitely going for things that are already in your house, maybe, or things you can canvas from others, like buy and sell groups that are
Okay.
just cloth, scarves. Those are great for like building dens or nooks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cooking items, or anything where you can dig. Planks, like construction items. We've worked with some childcare centers where we've actually incorporated, uh, you know, planks and logs and even some mallets where children can practice using tools, things like that, where there's just this evolving nature to the elements or the materials you're using.
And so your special area of research is childcare centers. Is that true?
Yeah, so my research work that I'm doing for my PhD right now is deeply embedded in childcare centers across
Okay.
British Columbia, and that's really where my area of focus has been, but a lot of it will apply to other areas like parks and playgrounds, but most of my research work has been in childcare.
So if you were coming up with the absolutely perfect daycare center outside area, is it exactly the same as what you've just been saying a backyard could look like? Is there anything different that you would put in like a daycare center?
Yeah, I think with childcare centers, you have this different aspect where it's a structured setting and
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to support unstructured free play.
Mm-hmm.
So because there's an element of supervision where you have groups of kids and you have educators that are trained to make sure that there's the safety and well-being is at the forefront for children as they're playing, it does pose an additional layer when you're considering the design of these areas, because as much as we want to take the children's considerations into the forefront and plan it to be the best playground ever, there's this liability and ensuring that educators feel safe and supported with facilitating play. So I would say there is a bit of a difference,
Okay.
just especially based off my research work working with a lot of educators and childcare centers. So my, I guess, playbook or handbook for outdoor play spaces and childcare is slightly different,
Okay.
but still has a lot of the same elements.
What kind of things would be different?
So I think a big part for me when I'm thinking about a lot of the research work I've done is that a key characteristic of great outdoor play spaces, especially for young children, is this idea of character. And throughout my research work, I've seen that a lot of spaces, and this applies to city parks as well, there's almost this cookie cutter
Mm-hmm.
component or this copy, I call it copy paste. So they
Mm-hmm.
take, designers take an area and they're like, okay, this seems to be great. There's a slide, there's a teeter totter or a swing and a tricycle path, and we're going to copy that and just paste it across a bunch of centers
Mm-hmm.
around the region. And it just becomes this routine design that doesn't really add character to a
Mm-hmm.
space. And so when I talked with children in my research, because we can get to that, but I interviewed a lot of 3 to 5 year olds through the
Cool.
course of my research,
That's so
which has
great.
another fun component to it, which we can get into. But they do talk a lot about these really interesting things related to their play space that are usually very unique. So if there's like a castle structure or something that resembles um, castle or a fairy tale landscape, they will talk about it over and over and
Okay.
over again because there's this character to it.
Okay.
So, something that makes it so different than any other play space they've been to. And I think probably, I don't know if you have a similar experience, but when I grew up, we had a playground in my neighborhood that had this giant play ship. It was like a fishing boat, and I grew up in
Oh.
this city kind of on the river that had a large fishing community. And so we would always go to this large fishing boat structure and pretend we were catching fish to take
Okay.
down to the dock that was just down the street. And I can still remember it because it was just so different than the
Uh-huh.
other play spaces that I had access to. And that's kind of that character piece that children really, really resonate with. And we just have lost a lot of that in our
Yeah.
play spaces and in particular in childcare centers because this idea of being innovative or putting something very different that's unique is kind of been lost.
Okay. That's a really, really interesting thing because, now that you say that, when we lived in California, we were in a town called Santa Clarita, and it had a lot of parks, but I felt like they all looked almost exactly the same. You could tell that they just bought the structures from the same company, and it was like, sort of variations on a theme. And in Colorado, we found that they're very different, and they do have more of a personality where one park will have a spaceship and one park will be kind of based on like there's one in Fort Collins called Two Silos, and it actually used to be silos on a farm and they've turned it into a slide. Or one park will be more like a fire engine. And it didn't really occur to me that like those, I always thought they were cool that we went to different parks and they had different themes, but it didn't occur to me that I guess that probably really influences their play, right? If there is a castle, I suppose they would start playing something that has something to do with the castle. Whereas if they're at a play place that has a rocket ship, it would be a totally different game.
Yeah, the imagination and creativity piece is so important in children's play. And you do actually need an environment that can kind of set that up. So
Okay.
children will organically imagine and create, but if you have an environment that offers more opportunities to do that, then it's a lot easier to get into that form of play, but also maintain it for a long time and over and over and over again. So it's, children at childcare, they go to this space,
Mhm.
5 days a week often. And so how do you create a space where every time they're out there, they can get to that point where they're creating something new? And that's really the whole piece of creating outdoor spaces at childcare that makes it a lot different than maybe the backyard or even the community park, is because this group of children are going there over and over and over again, and you want to try and make it new and novel every single time.
Now, is that to say, like, if you're at a daycare, are you changing the equipment every couple of months? And, for a while it's a spaceship and for a while it's a dinosaur? Or are you just having lots of different things in the yard that they can go back and forth to? How do you kind of keep it fresh if it's if it's a static, like, building?
Yeah, and I guess that's to say the character piece doesn't necessarily have to be a static building. So it could be that the loose parts that are brought forward into the
Okay.
space have this character element to it, or the planting. I've seen childcare centers create these really cool tunnels out of planting. And these tunnels have served the character of the space, but they change all the time through the seasons because of
Oh.
the planting.
Huh.
So how the plants grow in the seasons, or I've also seen another childcare, they did a really great job where they had these wooden cubes with trellises and vines, and the plants would grow through the vines. So that cube became enclosed during certain seasons and
Mm,
open during others.
that's
And
cool.
so this element of change really drove the imagination and made it fun at different points of time. Unfortunately, with fixed structures, they serve kind of often one function all year round. They don't change. And I actually expected in my research to find that those fixed structures weren't needed at all, that we didn't need them. Let's just do loose parts. But children actually do talk about fixed structures. So I do think there's a role for them to serve, especially when we think about climbing and getting up high into places and having an element of predictability that children still sometimes crave. But it's being able to balance those with elements that change, such as, plantings throughout the seasons or loose parts. And I think all of those things can contribute to the character of a space.
Hmm. So let's see, in your bio, it says you study mixed methods approaches to engage children in the participatory planning process of outdoor environments. So that means like you really interviewed them and said what they wanted, or like what did you find out in your interviews? That's that's so great that you actually talked to the
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah,
What
I
did they say
feel like
that they
this is
wanted?
something. Yeah, this is such a great question that I'm glad you asked, because before I entered into my research work, I was not a mom, and I also think I was prepared to interview 3 to 5-year-olds, but I really wasn't. And so it was a lot of learning alongside the children. And we've actually done a lot of work working through the transcript since I collected this data, and I've learned a lot since then. But 3 to 5-year-olds can actually give you some really, really
Huh.
insightful ideas on outdoor spaces, but you do have to do a lot of interpretation of
Uh-huh.
how they're talking about things. So I think for me, one of the most interesting things that came up when I was talking with children was that they talked a lot about things that I wouldn't have noticed.
Hmm.
So, you know, jumping off points when I was talking to them was like, how do you feel about the sandbox? What do you do at the sandbox? How do you play with other children cooperatively at the sandbox, using kind of these very visible things in the space to kickstart the
Hmm.
conversations. And children didn't really want to talk about those things. I think those things had this element of predictability where they were very stagnant and they weren't something that had change, as we talked about. They didn't change very much. So
Hmm.
they really wanted to show me things like at one center, there was this window in the fence that they would go to all the time because on the other side of the fence was a pathway where people in the neighborhood would walk their dogs.
Mm.
And so this window was one of their favorite places because they could see the dogs from 10 to 10:30 every morning
Mm.
walk by, and they knew when certain dogs were going to walk by. Like it was this very structured routine that they had to go to this window in their morning playtime. And it was something I never would have known about
Hmm.
had they not told me about it. And it's an important consideration when we're thinking about designing spaces because just I think a couple months previously, we'd been working with a childcare center that kind of wanted to close off their fence because they were worried about interactions on the other side.
Hmm.
And it brought up this idea that, well, children actually were just, they've talked to us about how important that connectivity piece is.
Hmm.
So, do we need to talk to the children about what they want in this
Hmm.
space? Because as adults, we're clearly saying or seeing something different than what they're talking to us about.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds really like the main theme is change. If you can put anything in the environment that they're playing in that will change, whether it's a different dog that walks by, or a different person that walks by, or a different season that affects the plants or whatever, like anything you can kind of do to make the environment susceptible to change. Do you think that is kind of a common theme that the kids liked?
Yeah, for sure. I think actually there's a Professor Susan Harrington, who is a researcher here at the University of British Columbia. She's really talked a lot about this idea of change, and especially in childcare spaces. And so a lot of her research work I had reviewed before undergoing this study. And so the idea that change is something that children talked about almost just reinforced some of the previous work she'd done, which didn't necessarily include talking to children. So some of her work she's done, child interviews, and some of it has been a lot to do with the landscape architecture and quantitative behavior with how children move and use the space. And so my research work, where I really kind of got into more detail of how children perceive their space and what they like to do, actually did reinforce a lot of the ideas that she's found in her research work. And you're correct, that idea of change is really important because it had to do with um, this idea of creativity and adaptability. And children talked about creativity and imagination a lot, but they also talked about being able to pivot and do something different.
Hmm.
Uh, not not necessarily all the time, but I think sometimes when I was talking to them, they encountered this element of boredom,
Hmm.
and to compensate for boredom, they switched their activity.
Okay.
And so if you have a space that facilitates change, then it allows them to re-engage with a different activity or
Okay.
switch up what they're doing.
That makes sense. Have a few different options constantly going. Okay. Now, in terms of playgrounds, like what you would have at a public space, um, I think about how they've changed so much since I was a kid, and I I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but I would assume that they've gotten quote unquote safer. And, you know, my very favorite memory on the playground at my school was the teeter-totter. And my friend Ellie and I would bounce each other as hard as we possibly could. We would slam down on the teeter-totter so that the other person would just bounce up super high, like 2 or 3 feet or something. You'd still be holding on the handles, but your butt would go up like 4 feet. And we would just laugh so hard. I remember we actually like peed our pants once at recess. We were laughing so hard. And there was one time that I just slammed her down so hard, she actually flipped over the top and landed like on the bar of the teeter-totter. And I'm sure that's why they took teeter-totters out, is they didn't want kids doing stuff like that. And she was fine. Like, I'm sure it hurt a little bit. But, you know, I don't see teeter-totters anymore. They've shortened the length of the swings. You know, my kids say they're not allowed at recess to be on their stomachs on the swings. They're not allowed to twirl on the swings. The slides have gotten shorter. So sort of again, if you had a magic wand, what is the perfect playground to have at a public park that benefits kids the most? And is that the same or different than what we have usually these days at public parks?
I think you definitely hit the nail on the head there, where I say we because here in Vancouver, and I would say most urban communities and developed worlds, we're having a huge reduction in the possibilities for challenge or risk-taking in playgrounds. And that applies to public playgrounds as well as in childcare. But when we're thinking about parks and playgrounds where children kind of convene together on evenings and weekends, this idea that we need to minimize risk-taking or dangerous elements has really created, unfortunately, a world where there's not a lot of challenge for children. And this has a lot of negative benefits on children's health, development, and well-being. And we know that children are going to naturally seek out challenge. That's just something that they do. And a lot of our research has shown that children will find challenges. And if we don't have them available in the playgrounds, like you're talking about, so maybe those long slides paired with different size of slides so that there's different graduated elements of challenge, then children are going to probably seek it out in areas that are more hazardous. Or they're just not going to have any exposure to challenge, and that's really missing out on a critical life skill that they need to develop in childhood. So this idea that we're going to over sanitize or safety proof everything has actually a lot of risks associated with it to children's development. So to answer your question, the first thing, if I was designing my perfect playground with my magic wand, it would be lots of opportunities for diverse challenges. So that graduated challenge and risk-taking, where there's different levels that children can self-select what they're comfortable with.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would be the first thing. And I kind of want to actually say an example that I just encountered on this that really brings home this point is, in my community, we have this brand new playground that just opened up, and it had so many people going to it the first weekend it was open. It was the summer. It was a nice day. And I took my daughter, who's 1, and she was playing on this. It was like a wooden train structure that was very much designed for toddlers. And unfortunately, I think the playground that they designed was very much suited for the early years, so kind of the 3 to 5 age group, and didn't have really any climbing structures. And so what we saw was on this train, tons of 8 and 9-year-olds climbing along the roof, and adults and other parents were kind of going like, this isn't safe, because they kept slipping through, and kind of there was a lot of near misses with the toddlers underneath.
Okay.
And I kind of sat back and went like, this isn't the 8 and 9-year-olds' fault, because there isn't something here for them to climb.
Got it.
So they're going to climb this train that was clearly designed for the toddlers because
Okay.
that's the only opportunity they have to climb. So when we're thinking about playgrounds, we know that children across so many different ages are going to convene there. And so we have to
Yeah.
provide challenges for a variety of developmental levels, a variety of ages, and the different needs of children so that there are those healthy and optimal challenge opportunities to encourage this form of risk taking in the best way possible.
And what are some of those good risks and why do kids need them? Is it being at a height? Is it speed? Like, what are some of the good risks that we want them to be taking?
So there's actually, believe it or not, 8 types of risky play, and I can talk about each of those and provide an example because I
Sure.
think a lot of people don't know that there's so many different forms of risky play that are beneficial for children. And these categories were really coined by Dr. Ellen Sandsetter out of Norway. They do some great work in Norway on risky play with her research team. And so the first one is play at speed. So that could be running really fast, and that can be in an open area. It could also be sliding fast down a hill, where we think of like tobogganing
Okay.
or rolling down a hill. Play at heights is another category. So that's scaling the top of a tower, climbing a tree. The important thing about this one is heights can look different for all age groups. So if you think about a toddler, climbing up onto a stump might be the tallest vantage point they've ever gotten to that
Mm-hmm.
point in their life.
And it could
So
be like 3 inches
height doesn't have to
tall.
be right. And I think we always think about the classic example of a kid has to climb a tree to the very top, but that's not necessarily the case. Children spend their whole life looking up. Let's just give them the
Mm,
opportunity to have a different vantage point and see
mm-hmm.
things from a different outlook.
That's
And then
cool.
there's also playing with tools. Yeah. So playing with tools is kind of construction, like we've talked about with loose parts. That could be something as simple as learning how to connect, a mallet with a golf tee, right? So it doesn't have to mean that you're giving children a power drill, but it's setting up the stage to allow them to even use utensils, right? Which
Okay.
is a life skill. Play with dangerous elements. So that's something that we don't often see at playgrounds, but that can include water or ice or fire or things that might be slippery or muddy or dirty. Again, another essential part of childhood where interacting with water in a safe way is really a critical life skill
Mm-hmm.
and something that we often remove because we're very worried about the fear of injury or risk associated with it. And then there's also rough and tumble play, and this I think happens organically a lot of the time still with children, but
Mm-hmm.
it's more so restricted now.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in park settings, when we see conflict between children, we're immediately thinking we need to intervene and stop that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we want to make sure that any kind of aggression or bullying is tackled as a responsible adult. But rough and tumble, like play wrestling or some light shoving, when you think about grounders or tag or games that unfold that involve that rough and tumble, that is a really important part of childhood
Mm-hmm.
and learning how to navigate conflict with peers.
Mm-hmm.
There's also play with impact. So that's anything where you're kind of like crashing into something and not in a hazardous way where there's injury or serious injury, but more so you get that thrill and excitement of something bouncing off a wall or hitting the ground hard.
So is that like
And usually
jumping off of something?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And you get like a bounce back almost from the ground, like feedback or
Mm.
a sound associated with it. And there's so much thrill to that for children and as adults too. You think about it when you know, we're doing things that bring excitement to us. There's often an element of these that I've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
these types of risky play they're not just applicable to children; they're across the life course. And then, actually, a really neat part or category of risky play is this thing called vicarious risky play. And it's where children get a lot of benefit just from observing other children participate in risky play. And we'll see this all the time at the playground. And when we think about younger children or siblings or groups of children, children often will assess risk through watching other children do it first. And
Okay.
that's a really important part of risky play because it teaches them maybe how they would move their body in that activity, so they'll watch it before doing it. It's like riding a bike. Children will watch someone ride a bike before doing it themselves.
Uh-huh.
And so that's a really great one when we're thinking about younger children too, and the interaction between different age groups on the playground and being able to support those kinds of activities for all different
Which is why it would be
ages and
so
development
important to
levels.
have something that a 12-year-old actually wants to do so that the 6-year-old can be watching the 12-year-old instead of the 12-year-old saying, this is boring. I'm going to go back to the car.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's really, one of the main parts of it is just having these multiple risk-taking and challenging elements that children could even just observe different age groups and how they tackle those challenges. And then the last form of risky play is play with a chance of being lost, and that's really about playing independently. So I know I see you or can hear you laughing because this is often the hardest one to talk to parents about
That's
because as
got to be
soon
the
as you
hardest one
say,
for parents.
yeah, as soon as you say, "Oh, yep, chance of being lost," then parents are like, I'm on board with all the other ones, but that one you lost me because that's a parent's greatest fear a lot of the time, right?
Uh-huh.
Is, a child wandering off or getting lost. But when we talk about this one, it's really about independent play.
Okay.
So maybe they're not actually alone, depending on their age, of course. They might just be hiding in a nook or retreating to a space where they feel alone. It could,
Okay. So that could be hide and
yeah,
seek, and they feel like they're
exactly.
lost even though they're just in the broom closet or behind the house
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah,
Okay. Would this also
yeah.
include maybe saying, we've gone to the store 100 times and now it's okay for you to walk to the store by yourself? Like something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, this idea of independent mobility where children are able to walk or take transportation or bike ride somewhere on their own. Um, and sorry, it doesn't mean on their own, it could be with other children, but the idea is that there isn't an adult, hand holding or supervising them every step of the way. And it also could be that an adult is still with them, but maybe they're a block behind, or maybe they are taking more of a passive role in that journey. So there's multiple steps to what that could look like, depending, of course, on the age and the experience of the child. But it's this idea that children, deserve to be alone. They have earned that in life. They don't need to be surrounded by adults telling them what to do in every step of the way. And I think on playgrounds, when we think about the design of them, this is so important because most of the playgrounds I see now are very, very open. So they always encourage these like sight lines so that parents can see children at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this was created from a parent's perspective
Mm-hmm.
of saying, we want to always be able to see our child. We also see playgrounds that are entirely fenced in so that there's no risk of the child leaving the grounds.
Mm-hmm.
And what this is actually encouraged is parents just to sit on a bench and be on their phones because there is no possibility that their child will
Mm-hmm.
A, wander off, or B, uh, get lost somewhere because they're so easy to see and find.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, what I have kind of seen in some of my research is that there are some negative outcomes to this form of design because, first, children know this and they know they can never be hidden from view. So
Mm-hmm.
they naturally are just feeling over supervised.
Mm.
And then second, it actually has led to a lot of times where parents are less involved in their child's day-to-day play as maybe active participants because they're so removed from actually being like a co-participant. So yes, they're not restricting or directing, but they're actually not even watching, right?
Okay.
So they're allowed to kind of just sit and be on their phone now because the risks are completely eliminated.
And it's an interesting balance because you would think, like, if we are going to go back to a place where playgrounds are actually riskier and there is a little bit of a chance that you could get hurt. I mean, obviously, we don't want something where somebody's going to get seriously hurt. We don't want kids dying, obviously. We don't want them falling off the very top of the slide onto their head. But in some ways, then you do need to be a little bit more of an active parent. So you're hands off enough to let them do the thing that thrills them and scares them, but you're making sure that they're not doing something that is actually really dangerous. And so, like, if you think, oh, this place is so safe, and you just are on your phone and you're not paying attention to when they misuse the equipment and are actually really going to hurt themselves, that's no good. What's like the most important part of what we would call risky play?
So risky play, from a definition standpoint, the definition that we use in our work is that it's thrilling and exciting forms of play that involve uncertainty and a risk of physical injury. And we use that definition quite intentionally because the idea that there is a risk of injury is often met with a lot of pushback
Mm-hmm.
because no one wants to use the idea that injury is possible.
Mm-hmm.
But injury is possible in everything we do in day to day. That is
Mm-hmm.
just the reality of life, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
actually have done so much work since especially like the 1980s, where we've seen this dramatic decrease in injury
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of different areas, thinking about, seat belts and car seats and helmet wearing, distracted driving. So we've done a lot of things to reduce the risk of injury. And yet, on the flip side, we actually have restricted children more and more, even with the data showing that their injury risk is decreasing. So when we say that there's a risk of physical injury, it's because we're saying that we haven't removed all
Mm-hmm.
elements of challenge in the environment. We have supported children through their play to take on those challenges and navigate them, knowing that there is the possibility that they could get a bruise or a scrape or a bump or a scratch. Where there's kind of this difference in I guess setting things up is that as an adult, we have a duty of care to remove hazards and
Mm-hmm.
make sure we step in if there is a hazard.
Mm-hmm.
And so a hazard would be something that a child can't identify. As adults, we have a lot more experience and knowledge. We know things like if an equipment is broken or malfunctioning,
Mm-hmm.
that challenge isn't going to be a safe challenge
Mm-hmm.
in that moment. And so we need to step in and ensure that a child's not navigating, like a broken
Mm-hmm.
monkey bar set
Mm-hmm.
where there actually is a risk for more of a serious injury,
Mm-hmm.
or doing an environmental sweep of a ground to make sure there's nothing hazardous, like, in urban settings, we're thinking of litter or cans or sharp edges.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we've swept the area, encouraging children to go barefoot, right? Because
Okay.
that might be seen as a risky play activity because who knows what's on the ground. But if
Right.
we've swept the environment to ensure it's safe, then let's make sure that children have that opportunity to navigate it on their own accord.
That makes sense. So it's like if we realize that it's very hot outside and the metal slide is incredibly hot and it's going to burn them, and we warn them about that, that's different than just being like, don't go on the slide, it's high. Or like you're saying with helmets, there's a difference between wearing a helmet on your bike to avoid a head injury that could kill you or paralyze you versus going in a tree and like, you know what? Yeah, you might break your arm, but you're not going to die from breaking your arm. So the risk can outweigh, or the benefits can outweigh the risk. Like it's so beneficial for them to climb a tree that if they break their wrist, it's not the end of the world. Whereas falling on your bike and getting a head injury is something we really do want to avoid.
Yeah, and we can really lean on injury data to support a lot of what you're saying. That's exactly right. So helmets were implemented because there was definitely research to show that head injuries are serious and they can be fatal, or they can alter the life trajectory for a child. So helmets are essential. Same with seatbelts, same with car seats. The difference being is that actually injury data has shown that, injuries are not that common from children climbing trees or
Hmm.
playing on the playground.
Hmm.
And so the risk of injury is quite low. And so all the fear around something like climbing trees is not really backed up or supported in the
Mm.
research. So why would we jump in and stop that activity? And I think as adults, this idea of assessing for hazards really entails, okay, child's going to climb a tree. Well, as an adult, I know, is there some branches there that might be a bit, you know, narrow, or they'll break easily? I can
Mhm.
identify those and support the child
Mhm.
to make those decisions, especially if they're just starting on this, it's their first time climbing
Mhm.
trees. Let's make it a positive
Mhm.
experience and ensure that there's, this agency for them to make their own decisions. But at the same time, I'm able to assess hazards and ensure that, those serious injuries aren't going to be likely.
That's good. And I remember at my son's preschool, it was so wonderful that if they were climbing a tree or climbing a structure and they said, "Oh, I can't go any further up, help me," they would say, "You know what? That's your body telling you that this is as high as you can go. This is as high as you're ready for. I am not going to help you. Like this means that this is where you stop. And maybe tomorrow you'll go a little bit higher because you'll be a little braver, but like not helping them to go higher than they're comfortable with, because this is how they learn their own personal barometer of what is safe and what is not." And I'm wondering, is that part of the benefit of risky play? Is like, does this teach kids better how to assess like actual real risk? Like if they've been allowed to do things that were thrilling, kind of how does that play into learning when their body tells them, no, 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 this is, there's one thing that feels fun and one thing that really feels dangerous.
Yeah, great question. So I think the benefits for child development in terms of participating in risky play, there's so many, and research has shown this time and time again. But a really big one is that when children participate in risky play, there's this chance of uncertainty. And that is something that has basically completely disappeared from most children's lives today,
Mm.
right? When we've talked about how structured everything
Mm-hmm.
is, their next hour is set up, and we've really eliminated this failure component to their lives. So, uncertainty, where there's a chance of failure, is not very prominent in children's lives today. But uncertainty leads children to assess situations and, develop those critical risk management and risk assessment skills. It also, when children fail, they learn a lot from that.
Mm-hmm.
And failure can look like a bump or a scratch. It could look like, a bit more internalized failure of feeling defeated or anxiety or stress about not achieving something. And well, none of us enjoy, watching children work through those emotions. They are a critical part of life,
Mm-hmm.
and not just childhood, adulthood too. So if children don't experience those things in childhood, how are they going to learn to navigate those feelings into adulthood?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the research has shown that when children have this uncertainty, this possibility of failure and sometimes actual failure through their participation in risky play, is that it has this wiring in children's brain where they have more flexibility to handle future failure and challenges. And this impacts,
Mm.
their self-confidence, their emotion management, so how they portray their emotions as they age, seeing those like outbursts of distress or aggression, those can often be managed differently because they've gone through those emotions
Mm.
through their participation in risky play. And I think this is really an important message because as parents or adults or caregivers, we feel as though we need to protect children from feeling those things like anxiety, but we now as adults, we know it's part of life,
Mm-hmm.
right? That anxiety is naturally occurring. And some feelings of anxiety or stress are helpful,
Mm-hmm.
right? It means that we care and that we are interested or passionate or motivated towards something. And we need to make sure we can rationalize those feelings within ourselves. And that's part of what risky play can support children to learn.
And really building resilience, I suppose.
Exactly.
Huh. Well, I feel like I could talk to you for 5 hours, but I will move to my last question, which I think is very appropriate for what we've been talking about. And I like to ask everybody, what is a time from their childhood that they have a favorite memory of when they were allowed to do something independent and they weren't with their parents or weren't with adults, whether you were by yourself or with friends? What's something fun that you did totally independently as a kid?
Love this question. And oh, there's so many. I think for me, I always come back to we had this giant tree in our front yard, and we didn't have a very large backyard, but in our front yard we had this massive tree, and I would always go out there before dinner and climb it. And all the kids on my street would kind of convene at this tree, and it
Hmm.
became this central spot for us to meet after school. And this was, I'm maybe like from ages 4 to 10 probably till I got a bit older and was like, "Oh, I'm gonna hit the rollerblades and patrol the neighborhood." I moved to that stage of life at around, 10, 11. But
Mm-hmm.
from those early school age, it was like this tree was like the central hub, and then my, parents were both worked in the school system, so they were out of work around, like, 3:30, and they would always come out and bring, like, popsicles, and
Oh,
it just
fun.
became this, like, central meeting space. And it's something that I think I mentioned earlier, like, we don't have a tree on where I currently live, and
Mm-hmm.
and there's no tree here, and it really does hit me a little bit that
Mm-hmm.
I had that opportunity to have a climbable tree that resonated with so many people on my street and children, that it's not common. And maybe it was common, 20, 30 years ago, but it's not as common now. And I think that's really what reinforces a lot of this work, in that childhood has changed so much, and we really need to make a conscious effort to try and bring back those memories from
Mm-hmm.
childhood so that all children can experience that. I would love for my daughter to have a similar free play
Mm-hmm.
upbringing that I was so fortunate to have.
You need to plant a tree. Hopefully, it'll be big enough by the time she gets older.
It's funny you mentioned that. We did plant a tree last year, and we like planted it from like very, very, very small. And then we got hit with like a really intense heat wave.
Oh, no.
And we're still trying, but it's baby right now. So yes, we're working on it, but
It may or
it's
may not
not
make it.
ready for climbing. It's not ready for climbing, that's for sure.
Did other kids get in the tree with you, or was everybody just kind of down at the bottom watching you?
No, we all got in the tree. I actually have this great photo that sometimes when I do some presentations I bring up, and it's me and there's like four other of my childhood friends from elementary school in this tree, and we're all in these dress up costumes. And I guess we had just put on like a play
So cute.
at the bottom of the tree for the parents, and then had just quickly, we talked about change and being
Oh,
able to
yeah.
switch up activities. All of a sudden went to, okay, we're going to just climb in our dress up outfits. And actually, at the bottom of the tree in this photo are like two of the younger siblings. So my brother's 4 years younger, and he would often just watch
Okay.
from the bottom. And yeah, it's that element, right, of this inter-age
Mm-hmm.
being able to support this form of play across different ages, and sometimes they're just watching and observing, and we're trying our best to be a good example. So hopefully I was most of the time.
And did he eventually get old enough that he would climb it also?
Yeah, he was actually, I would say, more adventurous than I was. So I think that often happens with a younger sibling where he took on way more risks in his play than I did. I was actually a bit more of a cautious child. That was just my nature. But I think having access to free play really pushed me outside my comfort zone and allowed me to develop some of those skills in risk taking and risk management. But yeah, my younger brother was just, he was gone. My parents always had to, track him down the street or try and kind of put more boundaries, I guess, because he would have just climbed as high as possible. And, I think they let him do that a lot of the time, but he did have a lot more broken bones growing up than I did. So, yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with everybody. And it's, like I said, I could talk to you for hours because I think this is so fascinating. And thank you for helping us understand some of this research. And I just really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I hope everyone heading into we're in the summer right now as we're talking about this, but I hope that as much as you're looking outside right now as you're listening, you also think about all of this in maybe the not so nice weather and the rain, because all of this can happen all year round, and you just gotta make those baby steps, and it's not as big of a hill as it might seem. So we're doing the best we can as parents and adults, but I know that our children will appreciate it as much as we can get them outside as possible.
And then hopefully they will have these fabulous memories like we do.
I hope so. That's my dream for my daughter, to have the same memories I did.
A special thanks to Rachel Ramsden and her entire team that she works with at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, especially her advisor, Dr. Mariana Brusoni, who has done so much work through the years about play and whose research a lot of this is based on. Thank you for listening to Screen Less, Play More podcast. If you like what you hear, please tell your friends, and please rate and review us on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, wherever you listen. That really helps other people find us and helps us get the word out. A special thanks to WJD, who does all of our IT, and Neil Penninger, who composed our theme music. Please also check out screenlessplaymore.com for research about kids and tech, some ideas on getting kids outside playing and away from screens, book recommendations, and so much more.